All right, I'll call this meeting to order. Can I have a mover and a seconder to call the meeting to order? Councillor Cabral, Deputy Mayor Coughlin, that the regular meeting of Council of the Township of Springwater on May 1, 2019 come to order at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. Please stand for the singing of the national anthem led by Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all our sons commend. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, Council. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, if they do arise, please disclose them at the time. So we're pleased to start at 4.1 by calling on Mr. John Spring to present a delegation to Council for up to 10 minutes on the Floss Road Concession 10 West. Mr. Spring, please come forward, have a seat, pull the mics towards you.
Now, if I may, before I get started, just make sure things work here.
Sure.
Good. Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Councillors, thank you for allowing me to speak to you about an important matter, which is in regard to the cancellation of paving Floss Road 10 from County Road 27 to County Road 29, also known as Crosland Side Road. I have been following local politics, and as a concerned citizen and business person, I appreciate the concept of long-term planning and spreading the cost of major infrastructure investments over a reasonable time period. I commend the Springwater Council for developing first a 6-year and now a 10-year capital plan. All of our rural roads were designed approximately 150 years ago for one purpose. It was to move product and crops to and from the farm to the market. Road building was not based on traffic studies, but on the need of the local farming community. The more activity, types of production, and types of vehicles dictated the road standard. That should still be a reason to remediate and rebuild roads today. The amount of traffic should be a minor element. When the budget was passed for 2019, much to my dismay, there were major changes made to the 2018 6-year capital plan for road construction. The change that I want to bring forward is project number 2019-26, Floss Road 10, County Road 27 to County Road 29, also known as Crosland Side Road, which involved the hard surfacing of the road. This remediation has been on the plan since 2016, and I, for one, lobbied extensively to have this to be added to the budget. About 7 years ago, I began to ask when we could expect to get this road paved. The base of the road is in very bad shape, and in some spots, it becomes unsafe when the base breaks up. The portion of the road from Usher's Side Road East to County Road 27 is narrower than the road on the west side of Usher's Side Road. There is no shoulder whatsoever on the entire stretch of the road in question, and if wide farm equipment meets on the road, problems develop very quickly. I was told by then Ward 1 councillor that funds had already been allocated to other projects and there was no additional money in the budget for more road construction at that time. Being a business person, as I mentioned, I appreciate that budgets must be built and followed. I said we were willing to wait our turn. As time went on and a new council was sworn in 2014, I noticed nothing was happening in regard to this project. I contacted Katie Austin, Ward 1 councillor at that time, and made her aware of the situation and began to push for action. I also noticed as time went on that hard surface roads were being fixed. However, nothing was moving forward on the Floss Road 10 project. I started to advocate for the project to get a commitment from the council. The commitment was made in 2016, and Floss Road 10 was put on the 6-year capital plan for completion in the summer of 2019. The wait was over, or so we thought. I learned that the plan was to use double chip and tar on it. This was a concern to myself and the residents of Floss Road 10, as we felt the use of farm equipment and heavy trucks up and down the road would cause it to deteriorate quickly. We had observed what happened to other roads in the area that had been given this surface. We felt that pavement, not unlike that found on Floss Road 10 west to the beach, starting at County Road 29 or Crosland Road, is the only logical alternative. Upon talking to Councillor Cabral, I found out several weeks ago that the project had been dropped altogether from the 10-year capital plan for 2019 and also in its long-term plan in favor of rehabilitating hardtop roads in the south end of the township. I must say this took me by surprise, as Floss Road 10 is in significant need of repair, and freshening up and grading the gravel is no answer to its problems. I must ask this council why this plan changed and who are the person or persons to recommend it. Why was the 6-year capital plan not allowed to finish out its lifespan, which ended in 2019? Why were so many projects in the 6-year capital plan dropped and do not appear in the new 10-year capital plan? Were the new council members made aware of the significant changes to the now 10-year capital plan when it was approved? We waited patiently for our turn, only to get dropped altogether from the 10-year capital plan. When you look at the long-term plan, there is no plan at all to fix the pavement in the next 10 years. This is totally unacceptable. I have asked several councillors if there was a vote to rescind the last year, 2019, from the now defunct 6-year capital plan. As of this writing, I do not know that answer. Even though we have been very patient, our patience has run out. Removing the Floss Road 10 project is a slap in our faces, and we definitely feel ignored and taken advantage of. The residents and landowners on Floss Road 10 have been led astray by the township. What has happened to the Floss Road 10 project is simply not fair to the taxpayers on this road. It is obvious to anyone that Floss Road 10 West is in need of major repair, and it cannot wait. I live in the area. Our farm business has many agricultural properties on this road. I am all too familiar with the problems associated with this section of Floss Road 10. This road should have never been removed from the new 10-year capital plan. If the township consultants say the road was satisfactory or could not see its problems, they obviously have not investigated this road thoroughly. I ask in the strongest of terms that Floss Road 10 West project be reinstated and paved as planned this summer. We are not trying to get something we do not need. I would be pleased to answer questions from the council after this short PowerPoint presentation. If you would look at the screens, I went up and took pictures of the road. The explanations on the pictures are self-explanatory. This is the predominant condition of the road. Potholes located in the entire length of the road. The entire length of the road is in this condition. At the corner of County Road 29, Floss Road 10, and looking east. Here's a pretty typical picture. That pothole that the arrow is pointing to was over 4 inches deep. This is at the intersection of County Road 27 and Floss Road 10 West. Here I wanted to point out the shoulders on the road are higher than the road itself. They act as dams. When it rains, the water cannot get away, adding to the woes of the condition of the road. There is absolutely no shoulder on this road. And this is the problem that we have with the modern day farm equipment. If you look, you can see that even without implements on, we can't get by each other. The conclusion is Floss Road 10 West currently presents a community safety concern. This was highlighted as an area of need in 2006 by the council and still remains a significant concern and continues to present more risks left unaddressed. Floss Road 10 West must be fixed. This is the last slide. I'll just leave this on. Thank you very much for giving me your time.
Thank you,
Are
Mr.
there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Spring. I'll direct questions here, thanks. Thanks for the delegation. I would like to refer this to Director Coleman regarding the changes of the multi-year capital plan, but before I do, I wanted to review some numbers from our 2019 budget and going forward, just to put things in contact and perspective. I see a couple more people have arrived. There's some chairs up front if you care to sit down. The 2019 capital budget consists of an investment of $16.6 million, $8 million of new requests and $8.6 million of carry forward from 2018. Of that $16.6 million, roads and related infrastructure consists of $4.6 million, or 28%. The capital budget funding comes from DCs, reserves, grants, provincial and federal funding, and the rest comes from operating budget taxation to the residents. In 2019, this amount is $997,500 from taxation, which is $111,000, or 12.6% more than it was in 2018. So let's take a look at the $4.6 million related to roads and infrastructure of the $16.6 million capital budget for 2019. Roads and surfacing and or rehabilitation is $843,000 of that, with 18% in Ward 1 projects, 4% in Ward 2 projects, 78% or $663,000 in 11 smaller Midhurst Ward 5 projects. Under the category of urban rural road reconstruction, of the $4.6 million in 2019, $3.2 million or 70% is in 6 projects. $930,000 relates to the Ronald Road reconstruction in Minising, Ward 3. $1.9 million relates to 4 Ward 2 projects, the main one being the $1.4 million Albert Street East reconstruction in Hillsdale. There's rural road construction is $210,000 for 3 projects in Ward 3, and structures and bridges and culverts over 3 meters is another $315,000 over the township and different bridges and culverts. So in summary, for 2019, roads and related infrastructure, $4.6 million of the $16 million 2019 capital. Ward 1 is 2 projects at $210,000. Ward 2 has 5 projects for $1.9 million. Ward 3 has 4 projects for $1.1 million, and Ward 5 has 13 projects for $1.1 million. So Midhurst has about 25% of it, and the other 75% is north of Midhurst. There's nothing in Ward 4. Let's look at the 10-year capital plan from 2019 to 2028. We plan, approved as a council at this point in time, to spend $138 million in capital expenditures over the next 10 years, split between $93 million in renewal replacement and split between growth-related $93 million and renewal replacement $45 million. Of this, roads and related infrastructure takes up $27.5 million of the $93 million growth and $21.6 million of the renewal replacement. And the 10-year capital plan proposes to utilize debt in order to make the required investments in the township's capital infrastructure. Total outstanding debt at the end of last year, December 18, was $4.4 million for the township. $1.6 million of it being for roads, capital projects, and $2.8 million being for the township admin center. An addition of $5 million in 2019, $3 million of that being previously approved road capital projects, and another $2 million identified in the 2019 capital budget. It's anticipated that in 2020, the township will be required to borrow $9.3 million, $6.5 million in 2021, and $1 million in 2022. So by 2022, mere 4 years from now, the total outstanding debt is estimated to be at a level of $26.2 million. Of this, $13 million will pertain to the township's portion, which is called the benefit to the existing of the anticipated construction of the multi-purpose complex, the rest being financed by DCs. $2 million for the township admin center, leaving $11.2 million for roads and infrastructure debt by 2022, compared to $1.6 million as of December 31st, 2018. The 2019 projected debt servicing costs for the debt that I just described is $1,045,000, and that comes from taxation. And $280,000 of that pertains to roads and bridges, and $765,000 pertains to roads and bridges. And remember that a 1% tax increase in 2019 equals $120,000 of net tax levy. So I wanted to give context of what we're looking at as a council when we look at not only the 2019 budget, but the 10-year capital plan. And this is the infrastructure deficit that we're constantly, and all of the municipalities are dealing with, to balance the maintenance of your present infrastructure versus what you can afford to make costly improvements to infrastructure. So I will now turn it to Director Coleman to talk about the changes that have occurred in the long-range financial plan with respect to roads.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So most of it I was not here for, but I went through the history. I'll go back to 2011. There's a staff report that went from a previous director to council regarding road conversions and bridge rehabilitation strategy, in which staff brought council's attention to the fact that the yearly budget does not satisfy the existing hard surface roads. Staff were instructed to create a long-term capital roads budget at that time. So in 2012, the 2013 budget deliberations and highlights for public works stated a continued investment in existing hard surface roads. In 2014, the consolidated budget showed several gravel conversions in 2015. However, in July 2014, council adopted the asset management plan, which provides guidance on which roads require resurfacing and when it is recommended. After that point, the 2016 consolidated 6-year capital plan seemed to move all gravel conversions back to 2020. In late 2017, we commissioned a consultant to carry out a road needs study. It was completed in late 2017, as I mentioned. However, the budget for 2018 was mostly complete at that time, so there were no significant changes done to the long-term capital budget. In 2018, after budget was adopted, I was able to better review the road needs study and its recommendations and lay out the 10-year capital plan that was presented to you last fall. In late 2018, during the budget deliberations, my recommendation to council continued to be to deal with the infrastructure deficit as it currently exists on hard surface roads. The 2017 road needs study, similar to the asset management report, shows a significant amount of money required over the next 10 years to keep our current hard surface roads in fair to good condition. You will recall during the budget process I explained resurfacing and how we need to resurface roads and why it needs to be done at certain times so that we don't let our roads deteriorate to a point of having to reconstruct them. So that's where we sit today with a 10-year capital budget as that was presented and approved to you last fall for 2019, and then 2020 to 2028 as a proposed 10-year capital plan. You'll recall, Mr. Mayor, we briefly discussed yesterday a neighboring municipality who paved all of their gravel roads funded by debt. They failed to do any upgrades to these gravel roads, and now they are in a significant budget crunch to rehabilitate those roads. And I will leave it at that and be open to your questions.
Thank you. Director Coleman, so the normal maintenance and repair, I mean, that the pictures tell the story. That's a pretty untravelable road in present state. Can you just describe what we've done to the road thus far this year, what the conditions have been this spring, and what would be the intent with respect to this particular road for this year, pursuant to what we approved in the budget?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly with frost coming out of the ground and the significant amount of rainfall we've had, the gravel roads have been in poor condition this spring. Our graders, both graders are out and they're grading when they can. Today obviously is too wet. I suggest that tomorrow will be too wet as well. We need to wait for things to dry out so we don't obviously create mud. Floss Road 10 West is slated for 4 inches of gravel in the fall. So the things will dry out in the spring. We will grade it. Calcium will be placed probably in early to mid-June whenever weather conditions allow. And then in the fall, there'll be 4 inches of gravel laid on the section from County Road 27 to County Road 29.
And when was that last done to that road?
As near as we can figure, portions of it were done in 2014.
14. Okay, I'll open it up to council for questions, comments, please. Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. I found your overview of the budget excellent. If you would make sure that it got included into our minutes, I think the public would appreciate that. I know I would. And my question through to our Director of Public Works is, to bring the road up to the standard that Mr. Spring is suggesting, what would that cost?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Hanna. Asphalt alone, just give me 1 second. Mr. Spring has requested an asphalt surface road, so the asphalt, bringing the shoulders up, blending in shoulders and driveways would be probably in the neighborhood of $500,000. That does not include any base repairs that may be required or any road crossing culverts that may need to be replaced. We would certainly do those things prior to laying down any asphalt.
So once you included those costs, and that would be a logical time to address the shoulders as well, to address the leveling with respect to driveways, what's a more realistic estimate, given that, of the total project cost?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. It's hard to guess without knowing how many cross culverts there are and the actual condition of the base at this point. Certainly, you could probably add another $100,000, $200,000, depending on what needed to be done.
Further questions? Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Mr. Spring, I have a few questions for him, and I will also have questions likely for Public Works and a few comments to be made. Mr. Spring, why do you feel that the road is not being maintained or standing up to the Floss Road 10, the vehicular traffic?
Well, this road has never really ever had anything major done to it since 1967. And I stand to be checked, it might be a year or two out. It was reconstructed in 2 phases from Usher Side Road East to County Road 27 in 1964. Old methods of road building were used then. There was topsoil scraped to the center and pounded into the ground, and then gravel put on top, which is one reason why the base on that section of the road is absolutely terrible. The other side of the road, from Ushers West to Crosland Side Road, was widened a bit, and the base is a bit better there, but it has had no really significant major upgrades. One of the reasons being that the base is wet, It needs to have the way that the council has, or the roads department has been doing it, and they've been tiling it, and it's been working.
Excuse me, Councillor Cabral, can you turn your mic off, please?
Oh, continue?
We're okay.
Okay.
Continue, please.
The other reason why the road is breaking up so badly is because council put a 18-ton restriction on a bridge on the 11th concession, so trucks coming from the north can't go down that road that obviously are over that restriction, so they go down the 10th. The 10th concession is not a road that was meant in its present form to take much traffic with a lot of weight. It's taking more weight from multi-wheeled vehicles. Farmers are using it more. After all, farms are bigger. There's farms all over. We have to travel the road with the equipment, as you could see on that picture, to get to the farms. And basically, that's why roads were made in the first place, to produce food for urbanites.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Councillor Cabral?
Would grading improve that if more grading was done there, Mr. Spring?
Well, I know for a fact that the road has been graded 3 times this year and maybe 4 times. The grader goes up and down the road, and the pictures were taken I think it was last Thursday, just before it was graded again. And it certainly didn't help that road. Those pictures were self-explanatory. Even after it was graded on Thursday, and then they came back and graded it again, you go down the road and there's washboard. It comes back just as fast as the grader can go down it. And that being said, and there's no one here that's more sensitive to cost than I am, or equally as sensitive, forgive me. No one can tell me that it's not expensive to run that grader down the road multiple times, put dust control on it, which, by the way, just about everyone that signed that petition told me that dust control is not working. And I've lost my train of thought. Let's.
All right. Any other comments? Yes,
Oh, and
Councillor
the one
Cabral?
other thing was, it costs money to put gravel on that road. You pave it and your upkeep is done. Unfortunately, the road has never seen any major construction in years. That road has only cost us a lot of money, and we still don't have a decent road. The bleeding has to stop sometime.
Okay. Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I guess for me, I'd just like to frame this for Springwater and for everyone in the audience. As far as Floss Road 10 goes, this is the only municipal road in Springwater Township that actually traverses the entire township. It touches Oro Medonte at Scarlet Line, and it's a straight shot through Highway 93 all the way to County Road 27, and from there all the way to County Road 29, and from there all the way to the business section straight into Wasaga Beach and Beach Area Number 1. There's no other road in our township under our jurisdiction that actually does that. So I just want to point that out, that a lot of people use this road. The only stretch that isn't paved is that particular stretch right there. The rest of the road is paved. When you look at Floss Road 11, just one concession north, it takes people to cottage country, and yet it's paved from from County Road 27 all the way to 29, and I don't know when the last section was paved, but it was paved from there to the Wasaga Beach limits, and it basically goes to cottage country, Allenwood Beach area. The other thing I would like to point out is, and maybe it's my misinformation, but I'm looking here at the approved budget from December 20th, 2017 that was approved for 2018. And at that time, The cost for the rehabilitation, gravel road conversion to hardtop was listed here as $236,500. So I just see that there's a bit of a discrepancy with the 500,000 or more that was mentioned. The other issue I have is in 2016, I believe, the comment was that these were deferred to 2020. Yet, as I said, they're still sitting in here for the 2018 budget. What I find most troublesome is that this isn't only one project. This is one of 18 projects across Springwater Township that were in the 2019 budget had it been allowed to be completed. And I certainly agree with Mayor Allen. He's right on the money when he talks about funding, where the money comes from, how much we have to spend, and where it's going to be allocated. But I think in this particular case, we have to look at where the funds were going to be allocated. And I don't think that dropping them completely from the 10-year capital plan was something that I myself would have necessarily voted for. I found it troubling that council and its members are expected to be making informed decisions based on information available to them. Yet to me it seems somewhat unreasonable that 18 road conversion projects affecting residents across the township would be dropped from previously approved capital budget plan without input, debate, or direction from council, unless there was direction from council or a recommendation specific to these projects being dropped that came before council. I haven't been able to find that, but I certainly stand to be corrected.
Well, in the budget process, as you recall, we did have a session for both the 19 budget and the long-range capital budget, and we did talk about the different components, and there were reports by staff, and we did vote it on as a council, so I think if you recall and look back on the records, that was all covered, maybe and maybe not in retrospect in the depth or detail that you now want to cover it, which I think is pause for reconsideration of what we should do at this point in time. So what I'd like to do is thank you very much for the delegation.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. I'd like a mover and seconder to receive the delegation, please. Councillor Hanna and Councillor Moore. Any questions? Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and as long as Councillor Cabral's finished, at this point in time, I'd like to ask Council to add an amendment to it to request a staff report to come forward on our capital plan and what plan this council is endorsing. And while we don't have the ability to fet our future councils, we can get a really good idea of what we are going to commit to in the next 4 years. So if I can have an amendment or someone to second that, we direct staff to prepare a report to come forward outlining what we can do and what the implications would be.
And you're seconding that?
No, I'm not just yet, I actually.
Okay, well, let's get a seconder for that amendment. Councillor Moore? Discussion. Yes, Councillor Cabral.
Can I make a friendly amendment to that amendment then?
Saying what?
Depends. Well, my recommendation was going to be somewhat different, so I don't know where we stand right now, whether there's a pecking order or how we proceed.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you, this motion is on the floor. It is seconded, and the motion does read that the motion now before council be amended as follows: that staff are directed to prepare a report regarding the road's rehabilitation strategy, including projected financial implications. And if there's something that you would like added to that staff report coming forward, I'm open to that.
Just clarification. So what time period does that cover? Is that both the 219 plus the 10-year capital plan?
I'm speaking specifically to the 2019, or actual, so it would be then 20 and on, so the actual capital plan, not our operating budget for this year. If I can put
But
that in
both the
there.
capital plan for 219 and the 10-year capital plan?
Correct.
Maybe we should add that wording for clarification. Further discussion on this motion, Councillor Cabral?
I would like to suggest an amendment to that motion.
And that amendment would be?
That the staff be referred back to staff for staff to provide options within the present budget constraints to council for consideration that would reintegrate Floss Road 10 back into the 2019 capital budget, and that staff also revisit the other gravel to hard top capital projects so that they too may be reconsidered back into the 10-year capital budget plan schedule.
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you. So there can be more than one amendment to the main motion. At this time, Deputy Mayor Coughlin's amendment is on the table. That one can be dealt with, and then you may present your amendment. And both of them, if passed, could form the main motion at the end.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you, I guess, to Director Coleman. Is there difficulty preparing a report that would appease both Councillor Cabral and myself? I mean, it's the same information. It'd be more in-depth to do one report, but I myself would rather have all the information come forward in one report than to deal with separate items.
Director Coleman, please.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. No, I think that could be dealt with all in one report. If I may ask a question on Councillor Cabral's motion in terms of budget constraints, are you asking that the conversions be put back in and the same budget constraint is used, so I have to push hard surfacing out? Or do you want the truth on how much it'll cost overall?
May clarify what your motion is, or your friendly amendment is, please?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Director Coleman. For 2019, within the same budget framework we have now for road rehabilitation, paving, that type of thing, I would suspect that there may be some projects, and I've seen some in there that were actually brought forward, that might be moved back to where they were in order to accommodate Floss Road 10 at least. And I merely would like to see the other hard top conversions at least brought back in and find some place on the 10-year capital plan so that those residents in those areas will have some sense that at least they're back on the plate, and we'd be looking at them again during the course of the next 10 years.
Clerk Chaparro? Okay, so we'll deal first with the amendment of Deputy Mayor Coughlin. Can you reread your amendment, please?
Thank you, Marilyn. Through you, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Moore, that the motion now before council be amended as follows. That staff be directed to prepare a report regarding the roads rehabilitation strategy, including projected financial implications of both operating and capital budgets.
Any further discussion about this amended motion? Councillor Hanna.
So is this going to include the request by Councillor Cabral, and as the Director of Public Works suggested, that it would be okay to incorporate it all in one report? Is that what we're suggesting now?
No, what we're doing is voting on this motion, and then Councillor Cabral can bring forward a further amendment. Okay, all those in favor of this amendment? That's carried. Now, Councillor Cabral, can you reread slowly what your amendment, suggested amendment is to this?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. We'll do so. Suggesting that it be referred back to staff in order that staff provide options within the present budget constraint for 2019 at least to council for consideration that would reintegrate Floss Road 10 West back into the 2019 capital budget, and that staff also revisit the other gravel to hard top capital projects so that they too may be reconsidered back into the 10-year capital budget plan schedule.
Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Ritchie. Discussions, questions with respect to that? CAO Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the work on the 10-year capital program is not a problem for staff. Our challenge is, even in the meeting we have today, there are a number of approvals sought for projects that we've gone out to market for. that would conflict with what Councillor Cabral is asking us to do in terms of finding room in this year's budget. So just council's aware is that there are a number of staff reports today that anticipate moving forward on projects that we would be conflicting with through part of that motion.
Director Coleman, do you have anything to add to that? I realize we are, okay, you're shaking your head. Further discussions, comments? Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Was there money, after we did our budget, there was money that came from the province, I thought was tagged for infrastructure that might be outside of the budget that we voted on. Can you, or maybe Director Schmidt could talk to me a bit more about that? I don't know what the final dollar amount was, but,
Okay.
and has that been allocated? Thanks.
Between Director Schmidt and CAO Brinley, either want to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councilor Moore. We're trying to think. There's one funding envelope that we applied for funding for St. Vincent Street Bridge. Now, there's another envelope of funding that staff have not reported back to council on, but the focus of that is to find efficiencies in government. There was around $600,000 that was allocated recently by the province. And, I mean, council could consider this as part of that, but the intent of that was to develop efficiencies in government. So I'm not saying that's thrown out the window. That could be a consideration I could put on the list for council to consider. But that's the only other funding program I can think of at this time.
And has the grant application for the St. Vincent Bridge gone in yet? Has it been finalized? It has gone in, yes. Okay, other questions or discussions? Councillor Cabral?
Through you, Mayor Allen, I know I made my motion fairly specific. The intent is to get some type of option available that might be able to put Floss Road 10 back in the 2019 capital budget. Barring that, at least it'll be there, and we can maybe look at doing something concrete with it either this year or next year. So I'm happy maybe to get it back some respect that way.
All right, any further questions before we vote on this motion? So it's not committing, it's, as we discussed earlier, I think it's the same exercise we're going to be examining, and we can't guarantee any results from that report, but it's something that we will be carefully looking at again. Okay? We'll take the vote, though. All those in favor? Carried. Again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, where is it? Yeah. Now we're just, we're going to be addressing this motion as amended, so Clerk Chaperon's going to read it.
Okay, so this would be the final main motion, that the delegation from John Spring be received, and that staff be directed to prepare a report regarding the road rehabilitation strategy, including projected final implications of operating and capital, and that this project be referred back to staff in order that staff provide options within present budget constraints to council for consideration that would reintegrate Floss Road 10 West back into the 2019 capital budget, and that staff also revisit the other gravel hard top capital projects so that they too may be reconsidered back into the 10-year capital budget plan schedule.
Any further questions about that? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Next, we have a delegation from Mr. Bill French. Before we get into that, I'd like to comment introducing this delegation. This delegation was requested by Mr. French on the compliance audit matter that has gone on for 4 years and has cost Springwater and Mr. French a large amounts of dollars. There has been much written and discussed about this matter over the last 4 years. There is a report attached to tonight's agenda item, 7.1, item 2, written by Tony Fleming, the prosecutor for this matter, from Cunningham Swan regarding the 10 charges against Bill French pertaining to his election expenses in the 2014 municipal election. This report is important to read as it recounts what has occurred with respect to this from November 2018 to the last appearance on April 17, 2019, and it factually explains the actual outcome. In the report, the term diversion or direct accountability is explained. This is an alternative resolution to a prosecution proceeding to trial. As prosecutor, Mr. Fleming concluded that the 10 apparent contraventions of the Municipal Elections Act, as set out in the auditor's report, warranted charges laid against Mr. French. The prosecutor was confident that there was a reasonable prospect of conviction on those charges. Upon consideration of the potential for diversion, as previously explained, and the relevant mitigating factors, as well as the ongoing financial burden to the taxpayers in proceeding to trial in the face of an admission of responsibility and an offer to make a substantial donation to charity from Mr. French, the prosecutor concluded that diversion in this case was in the interests of justice. The statement read into court as part of the diversion process on April 17, 2019 is as follows. Mr. French acknowledges that he contravened provisions of the Municipal Elections Act during his 2014 election campaign. Mr. French has accepted responsibility for the contraventions. He was cooperative with the compliance auditor and has accepted personal responsibility and remorse for the errors that led to the contraventions of the Act. Mr. French advises that these contraventions were not committed intentionally. Though the Act doesn't require that contraventions be intentional for convictions to issue, the prosecution acknowledges the absence of intention is a mitigating factor. Mr. French has voluntarily agreed to make a $2,000 donation to the Elmvale and District Food Bank in order to settle this matter as a gesture of goodwill. The prosecution is aware of the cost to the public associated with continuing the prosecution of Mr. French. In light of Mr. French's acknowledgement of responsibility for his contraventions, the prosecution has determined that a costly trial is no longer necessary, nor would it be in the interest of justice. The prosecution has determined that diversion of charges by withdrawing them does not offend the interest of justice. This statement, therefore, in the report, is a public document and it serves to finalize the matter at this time. During the time period from November 2018 to April 2019, public statements about the court appearances regarding this matter were reported openly in the Springwater News, Barrie Today, and on social media posts with many strong opinions expressed. The discussion regarding this during the April 3rd municipal update at council meeting was a review of what was going on with this matter and a reiteration that this council had no control or influence over this matter, which we had not had since it commenced. It was totally appropriate to discuss this at that time and in that way, and was not appropriate to have a closed meeting regarding this at this point in the matter. It was discussing public information and publicly made comments. Throughout this matter, council and previous council were not able to direct or influence or become involved in any way with the Compliance Audit Committee or related legal proceedings under the Municipal Elections Act. Council, through the township lawyer, was reminded of that during the judicial review proceedings. If there is any suggestion that council could have intervened in this process at any time, then that would have involved another legal challenge with significant additional expense and uncertain outcome. We are not here today to hear or debate that hypothetical scenario. It should also be noted that I intend to make a delegation request at the upcoming Association for Municipal Officers of Ontario conference this August about the compliance audit process, and that any challenge under the Municipal Elections Act involving the Compliance Audit Committee be directed and financed by the province as a provincial matter to save the expense for individual municipalities. So, this delegation will be limited to the normal 10-minute period allowed. Matters dealing with personnel or personal matters will not be permitted during the delegation. This includes identifying individuals by name or position or job title. And we will follow the procedure bylaw, and that has rules of order and decorum. So not interrupting, not speaking out, not debating. I won't go through them in detail. Any comments are to be addressed to the chair. And there is provision that if that does not happen, that there are warnings and removal from the chamber, but I trust that won't be needed. So, Mr. French, I turn it over to you.
Point of order, Mayor, if I may, before we start.
Yes, Councillor.
I'd just like to make it clear that I believe, you can clarify this, but I believe there's an understanding that, excuse me, we as council will not be asking questions of Mr. French when his delegation is completed. And I just want people to understand, it's not that we're not concerned or have an interest. That's part of the agreement we have with this delegation. Is that correct?
That is, Councillor Hanna, and that reiterates the fact that under the procedure manual, we're not here to debate. We're here to listen to a delegation along the lines of what, and the rules that were set out. And so the only interruption will come if there's a contravention of that. But I appreciate you bringing that up. Council, are we all right? Proceed, Mr. French.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, Deputy Mayor, and members of council. Thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. First, some significant milestones as noted on the slide. January of 2017, Madam Justice Frances Kitely noted that the compliance audit matter was developing a life of its own and advised the parties to conference with Assistant Chief Justice Frank Morocco and seek a less expensive and early resolution in May of that year. January 2018, Madam Justice Anne Malloy, on behalf of the tribunal, noted in her decision that the Compliance Audit Committee misunderstood its role and that the township might intervene if the costs were excessive. April 17th, 2019, all charges against me were withdrawn by the prosecutor. This is the first time I have addressed Springwater Council on my compliance audit matter because, as mayor during the last term, I recused myself from any meetings or discussions on my compliance audit as required under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. On those occasions, I passed the chair to a member of council. I only come forward because my situation was discussed in open council in an update on April 3rd when it was still an active legal matter. Prior to that, my compliance audit had only been discussed in closed session, as it was a legal matter. Whether intended or not, I consider aspects of the update to have been an attack on my character, reputation, and integrity, and as such, I must respond. Council has received my lawyer's, Phil Horgan's comments. I sent it to you directly. The issue I have with the update was the proposition that first, I was responsible for most of the $310,000 of township costs, and secondly, that the township could do nothing to curb the spending. I disagree. I launched a judicial review application in November of 2015, challenging the decision of the Compliance Audit Committee's failure to take action on the Grant Thornton Auditor Report in the 30-day time frame under the Act, and also the unprecedented appointment of a second audit. There is no other case in the history of compliance audits where the first audit has been discarded and another one commissioned. We also now know that there was no significant difference between the findings of the two audits, as both noted minor discrepancies, but still $5,000 under the spending limit. We expected my JR to be heard in June or July of 2016, rather than 18 months later in December of 2017. Lawyer Harold Elston, acting for the township, fully supported my application and concurred with my lawyer, Renata Austin, that the Compliance Audit Committee had exceeded its jurisdiction. So if I did not cause the significant delays, what happened? Dan McLean, through his lawyer, Mr. Jack Siegel, launched a separate judicial review to challenge the original appointment of Grant Thornton, but Mr. McLean did not file his notice until July of 2016. That application became a moot point after the Superior Court decision in January of 2017. Madam Justice Frances Kitely supported Grant Thornton's motion to dismiss the application, upholding that the committee, not Grant Thornton, were the decision makers on whether charges should be laid. Madam Kitely's order to dismiss Mr. McLean's appeal of the motion was supported by both the township and myself, but was opposed by the Compliance Audit Committee. Justice Kitely expressed concern that this matter was costing everyone a lot of money and that the parties should consider some alternate course of action. In her decision, she wrote, and I will quote, "All of this is unfolding at considerable expense to the parties and to the ratepayers. I encourage all council and the parties to consider whether a judicial settlement conference with ACJ Assistant Chief Justice Morocco, who has agreed to make himself available for that purpose, might lead to an early and less expensive resolution. Under the auspices of Justice Morocco, a settlement conference was held in May of 2017 with all the parties present. Justice Morocco proposed an early resolution which was acceptable to Mr. McLean and I, but lacked full consensus. In the decision of my JR, Justice Anne Malloy, speaking for the tribunal, noted in her decision that the Compliance Audit Committee misunderstood their role, and I quote, "A tribunal ought not to compromise its neutrality and impartiality by taking an active position to one or more of the parties that appeared before it. If the Compliance Audit Committee had not directed their lawyer to argue against in both the Grant Thornton case and my JR, or if they had agreed to the course of action proposed by Justice Morocco back in May of 2017, how much money and time might have been saved by the township? The update on April 3rd failed to provide this information, which cast me in an unfavorable light. The update was anything but, it certainly wasn't anything but even-handed. As noted on the slide, the actions of others, not me, delayed proceedings 20 months. The update stated that this council and administration could do nothing to stop the increasing costs. So you must also be saying that if the costs had escalated to $1 million, there was nothing you could have done. Does that make any sense? The township might have applied for its own judicial review when the Compliance Audit Committee exceeded its mandate in October of 2015. I believe a court would have taken seriously concerns expressed by the township regarding the cost to ratepayers and may have ordered a resolution that would have been fair to all parties. That was certainly indicated by Justice Malloy in her decision, which was referred to in the update. In the same sentence that was noted in your update, Justice Malloy stated an exception, and I will quote, "Unless there was some issue such as excessive spending by the committee that might have been of a direct interest to the township." Do you not think $310,000 is excessive and a direct interest to the township? That probably would have paid for most of the road construction that Mr. Spring just noted in his delegation. Since 20 of the 24 months of delays were created by other parties, I also suggest that most of the $200,000 in extra legal costs noted in the update were caused by other parties, not me. Since my personal matter was brought into this chamber in an open rather than closed session, I ask Council to acknowledge that the update provided on April 3rd lacked balance and that my position be given equal weight in any future communications on this matter. I'd also ask that the letter from Phil Horgan in response to that same update be posted as correspondence at the earliest convenience. It may also be appropriate for the township to also support our petition on change.org to ask the province to end the misuse of the Municipal Elections Act, which to date has garnered almost 1,000 signatures. Thank you for listening, and Mr. Mayor, I invite any questions.
Well, as we said at the outset, we're not getting into debate or having questions, so thank you for the delegation.
Thank you.
Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the delegation, please? Councillor Cabral, Councillor Chapman, that the delegation from Bill French be received. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor. We brought 7.1 forward. Will we be discussing it in its completion now, or are we going to wait until it goes back up again?
We'll wait till it comes up on the agenda. Okay. Question period. If anybody would like to come and pose a question with respect to items on tonight's agenda, come forward, please state your name, and you'll have up to 2 minutes with respect to each question.
My name is Natalie Dennis. And my question is, during the last...
Excuse me, can you give me your address too, please?
Oh, sorry, I didn't ask. 3954 Horseshoe Valley Road in Minising.
Thank you.
During the last term of council, who took over as chair for the closed sessions that dealt with the previous Mayor French's compliance audit?
Repeat that, please. Who?
During the last term of council, who would take over as the chair, or who was attending in the meeting for the closed sessions that dealt with Mayor French's compliance audit?
I did, for most of them. I
Perfect.
think probably all of them.
Why did you not do something to control, especially the craziness, especially with the supposed expertise as a forensic accountant, you, Don Allen, Mayor Allen, and acting as our deputy mayor at the time?
As with the delegation, we're not going to get into questions with respect to debating what happened or did not happen with respect
So
to
as a
this matter.
deputy mayor, you didn't do anything to,
No, I'm stating what I just stated to you. We're not going to get into discussion or questions with respect to this matter.
understood?
Next. State your name and address, please.
Good evening, Mayor Allen and Council. My name is Sandy Agnew, and I live right at the end of Floss Road 10 in Ormadonte at 1305 Scarlet Line. I just wanted to correct one bit of misinformation, that there is another section of Floss Road 10 that's not paved, and that's from 93 to Scarlet Line. And judging from the pictures we saw, I can attest to the fact that it's in just as deplorable position or condition most of the time. So just wanted to
Thank
let
you.
you know that if you're going to be paving Floss Road 10, consider that end of it.
Thank you. Councillor Cabral, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, actually, that was one of the projects that was dropped, if I'm not mistaken. It was in the old plan for that portion to be paved, and I guess I should ask Director Coleman if that's okay. If that was in there, I believe I saw that stretch as being paved as well from 93 to Scarlet Line.
And Director Coleman, before you, through the chair, please. If you want to have that, you don't need to answer if that's not on your tip. It'll be part of the study that we have just agreed upon. So don't feel put on the hot seat with respect to that right at this point. Okay, thank you for that
Okay,
information.
Thank you. And I just wanted to also commend the fire department for putting out my neighbor's grass fire.
I thought it was too wet to have a grass fire these days.
Well, that was a couple of weeks ago.
Next.
David Strawn, 47 Finlay Mill Road, Midhurst, Ontario. And I wanted to make a very brief comment on the French situation, and I have a question to ask regarding item 8.10 on the agenda. So the brief comment basically was largely a commendation of your statement, Mr. Allen, because I believe I heard correctly that you were going to go to the AMO, was it, to see if you could get the responsibility for CAC transferred to the province?
We have been discussing that, and as you probably are aware, you make requests for the ability to delegate. That is one of the requests that we will be making at the AMO conference. Whether it gets granted and whether we can get to make the delegation is another question, but it's the intent to try.
Yeah, because you must feel, as most of us do, that the amounts of money spent on this case were excessive.
Yes.
And it makes sense to try to transfer those responsibilities to somebody in a position to change the Municipal Elections Act to deal with that kind of loophole, to stop that kind of thing from happening again.
Thank you.
Because I think there was a point that was mentioned in the prosecutor's letter to state that there was no excess spending on the election and the infrastructures were minor in nature. So that being the case, it makes the whole thing even more ridiculous than it looks. So that's the, I did want to say that the amendment is necessary to save mayors, deputy mayors and councillors from having to perfect their bookkeeping skills in order to avoid prosecution. The other point that I wanted to question is on item 10, the Midhurst Secondary Plan, which, as you know, is coming forward for some red line changes. It was interesting listening to John Spring's point about the roads. We seem to be spending more money on growth than actually fixing the roads to sell the products, which creates the money for the growth in the first place. So I think it's important to consider the income levels for the township equally with the expenditures. I think any new councillors who have to vote in any way today on the Red Line project needs to be aware of the fact that in 2012 there were 1,476 signatures on a petition right here against the Midhurst Secondary Plan, and since then, I checked today, there's 48,660 signatures online stating that the Midhurst Secondary Plan is an egregious plan to convert well-producing farmland into real estate and not generate any income. All it generates, as you know from Barrie and Vaughan and other places, is a massive amount of infrastructure deficit, which we already have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
My name is Michelle Bowman. I live at 2433 Russell Road. We've lived there for 5 years. I've been attending council for 5 years. I haven't addressed the new council, so welcome to everyone. I'm here with regards to 8.10, the Midhurst Secondary Plan. I understand that the red line revisions include additional density. I've, from day one, discussed density and the widening of Russell Road. I had done the delegation with regards to the widening of Russell Road. My question, actually I'll begin, I've all along for the 5 years, I've done everything that I've been told to do. So I've come to council, I've posed my questions, I did a delegation, I was suggested to do that. I have participated in the Part 2 bump up. And all along they told us that this was the fail-safe. This is what you could submit, and you know that was a good chance that you would be heard. Up until this time, I don't really feel that we've been heard. I don't see any great changes. So with regards to this red line revision and the additional density, I just want to note something that I had provided within my bump up. So my question to council is essentially, the issue I have is the multiple dwelling units. I don't have any issue with, you know, when I look at Springwater Township, I see 3-car garages and then I see townhouse after townhouse, or multiple dwelling unit, however you want to refer to it. So when I look at Snow Valley, 0 multiple dwelling units are proposed, 456 single dwelling units. when I look at, same thing, if I go into Sunnydale, I guess it's Sunnydale Corners, Stonewood Manors, 0 multiple dwelling units. If I go into Spring Lakes, well, that's adult living, but that's 0 multiple dwelling units. If I go into Maple Ridge, Fergusonvale, Ravines of Matheson Creek, 0 multiple dwelling units.
So Ms. Bowman, what is your question, please?
So the point is, when you get into the 2 fields across from our home, there's 2,631 multiple dwelling units. And you're gonna add to that by increasing the density in the Rose Alliance property. So that, I would just like to know why the inequity throughout the township.
What we will do is, when that item comes up, we'll be addressing that report, and we welcome you to stay and listen to us reviewing that report at that time.
Okay.
And we will address the point about density, so
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you. Kate Harries, 1186 Floss Road 10 East. So I did have a question, but since you're not taking questions, I'll just make a comment. And I do think it's a pity that you didn't allow council to ask questions of Mr. French and have any sort of debate, because I think the experience that we went through in Springwater over the last 4 years was one that we really need to resolve and learn from and move forward, and not allow anything about it to fester. And I guess my only comment is that it seems that there were, and I read the reports, the decisions of the judges, and I didn't pick up on it, but there were 2 hints that were highlighted by Mr. French that council had the option to take action, to ask a judge, is there a way to rule on the best way to control the expenditures without jeopardizing the independence and the integrity of the committee. And I think that should have happened, and council should have been proactive and not said there's
Okay,
nothing we
Ms.
can
Harries,
do.
Ms. Harries, thank you for that input, but we're not going to debate it. There have been other ways, as you well know, of expressing opinion, which has happened in the past, and there's the ability to dialogue, so we're not going to use this forum to debate, so thank you very much. Okay, that deals with question period. Moving on to 6.3, minutes of board, committees, and organizations. Can I have a mover and seconder to get that on? Councillor Cabral, Deputy Mayor Coghlan, that the minutes of boards, committees, and other organizations listed herein be received as information. Minutes of the Library Board meeting of March 19, 2019. Minutes of the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting of March 19, 2019. Any comments with respect to either of those? All those in favor? Carried. Yes, 6.1, which is on the agenda, actually will be added to the next agenda because items weren't quite ready for it. So those are minutes, right? Other minutes. Moving on to 7, correspondence. May I have a mover and a seconder to get correspondence and information? Councillor Cabral, seconded by Councillor Chapman. Is there anything that you'd like to, 2 items here, like to pull? Councillor Hanna?
7.2.
7.2. All right, any comments then on the other one? On 1? That the correspondence and information items listed in item 1, the letter from the County of Simcoe to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Regional Government Review be received as information. All those in favor? Carried. Councillor Hanna, the second item.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out that this letter 7.2, it's a letter from law firm of Cunningham Swan by Mr. Fleming, and it is the letter explaining the prosecution position, if you like, against Bill French. It's important, I think, for people to know, especially people at home that may or may not be familiar with legal processes. This prosecutor is a private law firm contracted by the Compliance Audit Committee. It's not the normal prosecutor or crown attorney hired and paid for by the Attorney General's office. So when you read the content, I think it's very important you keep it in mind that this was a law firm contracted by the Compliance Audit Committee, and keep that in mind when you read the comments. That's my point.
Thank you. So can I have a mover and a seconder to receive this, please? Moved by Hannah, seconded by Councillor Moore, that the correspondence and information item listed the letter of the Cunningham Swan re-prosecution be received as information. All those in favor? Carried. Action reports. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get those brought forward, please? Deputy Mayor Coghlan, Councillor Moore. Any of these like to be pulled to be discussed? Deputy Mayor Coghlan?
810, please.
Eight ten as well.
810 as well. Okay, we have a mover and a seconder to receive, and that the recommendations contained within the others approved as presented, and they are 8.2, award of the tandem truck tender, 219-02 PW. 8.3, the final acceptance and release of securities with respect to Elmvale Subway Commercial Site Plan. 8.4 being the award of design and contract administration, Ronald Road reconstruction. 8.5, development security reduction, Ferguson Vale Estates. 8.6, the aggregate production 219-8-PW. 8.7, the supply and place hot mix asphalt tender. 8.8, award of contract for the Albert Street East reconstruction. 8.9, upgrades to the fuel system at Yard 1. Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you, and just to advise council that on item 8.9, the motion was corrected. So the third paragraph states that the additional funds required in the amount of $54,347.81 be transferred from the Public Works Reserve. That has been corrected to be transferred from the Tax Capital Reserve.
Any questions before we vote on 8.2 through 8.9? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, 8.10, Deputy Mayor Coghlan.
Thank you, Marilyn, and through yourself, before we get into council's questions, I'm just curious if Director Spagnell can address the question from the public, from Ms. Bowman.
Okay, first of all, I want to get this motion on the table. Sorry, I should have. Moved by Deputy Mayor Coghlan, seconded by Councillor Chapman, that the report from the senior planner regarding Midhurst Heights subdivision, red line revision, and draft plan extension dated May 1, 2019 be received, and that Township Council does not object to a 5-year extension of the draft plan approval, and that the attached red line revisions are hereby endorsed and submitted to the County of Simcoe and Local Planning Appeals Tribunal for final approval. We have a mover and a seconder. Okay, Director Spagnell, maybe you could give us an overview and incorporate addressing the question that was posed.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. So what council is dealing with tonight is a red line revision request, which is meant to facilitate engineering reviews that require specific road widenings. Specifically, condition 147 of the draft plan conditions for the subdivision allow for minor revisions to a subdivision, provided that those revisions are considered to be reasonable. In this case, through the engineering reviews that have been conducted to the roads within and around the subdivision, there are necessary widenings which have resulted in the need for revisions to the locations of lot lines. As a result of that, what has happened is there's been a reduction of single detached residential lots and an increase of 6 multi-residential lots, and with some more narrow lot frontages. When looking at the revision, there is no change or increase to the density within the subdivision. There's no change to the total number of units that were originally approved by the Ontario Municipal Board. And on the basis that many of the proposed changes through this red line revision are at the request of the township's engineering firm, Ainley Group, the red line has been considered to be appropriate, along with the extension of 5 years for the developer to go and satisfy all draft plan conditions. With respect to the densities, I think it's important to note as well that this is a draft plan of subdivision approval that council is dealing with. Council is not dealing with the Midhurst secondary plan or the policies therein. Those policies were approved by the Ontario Municipal Board, and they are in effect and in force. What council is dealing with through this red line revision process is a technical matter to realign the roads, which has resulted in the changes that I've explained a couple of seconds ago. So I think it's very important to note that. The reason why I note that is that the secondary plan established densities per hectare to provide for a certain number of a population, to provide for a variety of unit types, which is what is incorporated within the draft plan that is sitting before council now, where we're looking for, where staff is recommending approval of the red line revision, and that the LPAT be notified as such. I'm available to answer any questions.
So the extension of the roads, does that constitute a widening of the roads? Maybe you could explain that. And also, sometimes we have reduced the 5 years to a lesser time period, 1, 2, 3 years. Comment on that, please, Director.
Mayor Allen, I can answer the second question. I'll refer the first question over to the Director of Public Works. You're correct in that there are varying years where council can weigh in on the length that the developer has to address draft plan conditions. They can be 1 year, they can be 2 years, they can be 3 years. In this case, it's 5 years. One thing to note is, from my perspective, I think the 5-year time frame is appropriate given the number of conditions, given the fact that there's quite a bit of work that still has to be completed in order to address those conditions of approval. And I think it's also important to note that ultimately the decision does rest with the County of Simcoe and LPAT, who is the local planning appeal tribunal. So council can weigh in on the time frame. However, at the end of the day, the final decision for that time frame really does rest with those two approval authorities. And I'll just turn over the first question to Director Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to the members of council. As we discussed yesterday, the 5 years is probably appropriate in this circumstance. There, as Director Spagnol's mentioned, there's several draft plan conditions. In addition to that, we still don't have feedback from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks as to where we stand. And after that point, the developer still will have to go back to the ministry for environmental compliance approvals for the plant, for the infrastructure, and for the water. So in all likelihood, if it were only 2 years, we would be back here again in 2 years discussing the same things. So 5 years seems appropriate for this.
Further questions, comments? Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I've discussed this with our planning department, and obviously I've heard some input from some of the residents. So I think it's important to point out, as the Director of Planning has suggested, because this is a 5-year extension, it doesn't mean that development won't happen before the 5 years is up. So people who think, well, that's great, it's been put over for 5 years, that's not quite accurate. It could happen sooner. The other issue, and I believe I got confirmation on this, it's currently 1,440 units. Because the road's being widened, but the 440 units has been approved by the OMB, if you like, because the road's being widened, we have to keep the 1,440 units. We can't reduce that. Could you please answer that, Director?
Director Spagnol?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Hanna. In this instance, there is not a unit change to the subdivision. There are instances where there could potentially be a unit reduction, but in this instance here, there is no change to the total number of units that were originally approved by the Ontario Municipal Board. So the units remain the same.
Follow on?
Thank you. I just wanted to make clarification so everybody understands. Again, and there's no change in the density. I guess the other issue I have, and if you look closely at the diagram that's up there, the two green squares you see to the right our parkland. And we're reducing, one of the requests is suggested to reduce the parkland, and I've done the math and all that, but it works out to 377.3 square meters of parkland that we're reducing. May not sound like much, but these are not very big park areas. And we're having a lot of townhouses, sixplexes, very few single-family dwellings. There's a few, but not as many as other areas have been pointed out. With single-family dwellings, you have backyards. With townhouses, sixplexes, multi-residential properties, you don't have the backyards. You don't have the green space for people. And I would like to see some kind of adjustment here. Instead of reducing the park space to accommodate this amendment, this red line, that we come up with a plan to save as much parkland as we can, because I think it behooves us as council to realize that people need green space. This project does not provide the same green space you'd get with single-family dwellings, and that's probably as big a concern as I think there is out there with this reduction.
Director Spagno, how could we push for more parkland space?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. When taking a look at the reduction in parkland space in comparison to the amount of parkland that is provided, I would say that the reduction is very nominal in comparison to what has been provided. The reason why I say that is the reduction represents a 0.092 acre decrease. And in essence, and I'll transfer that over to meters squared and to give an idea of what we're dealing with here. That's about 364 meters squared. What's going to be left in the plan will be well over 4.5 hectares of parkland, which meets the minimum requirement, or actually, exceeds the requirement for parkland for these plans. So to have to move forward and to try to push for more parkland to be provided through this plan, I think would be difficult, because the amount of parkland that is being provided surpasses what is required under the Planning Act and under the secondary plan. In addition to that, the reduction in the density from singles to townhouses, there would still be amenity space provided as part of those townhouse units, so it's not like that amenity space is being deleted. So to my mind, I think it would be a difficult argument to bring forward through the approval authorities and through the local planning appeal tribunal to try to push for maintenance of the increasing parkland on the basis that the decrease is so minimal.
The hectares that you, 4 hectares plus, is in that plan right there.
That's correct, Mayor Allen.
Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, and I appreciate through you to the director, I appreciate the response. I did speak to Mr. Belcourt, Parks and Rec. Just for a ball diamond, we need a minimum of 2 acres. And when you keep in mind that these sides of these parks are not that great to start with, I would just ask that going forward, any meetings with future developers in this Midhurst secondary plan, we keep in mind that there's a lot of multiple family dwellings with limited backyards, if any, and we need to keep as much green space going forward as we can. And I know my friend, the developer, is sitting back there today, and I think he also understands that there needs to be more green space, but you don't make profits for your investors by creating more green space. You have to sell houses. So there has to be a compromise, and I just want to make sure everybody is aware of the fact that we need green space when you have multiple family dwellings.
Thank you. Director Spagno, back to the roads. So there is no contemplation of further widening of the actual roads that we're talking about here being Russell and Dorn. Is that correct?
Mayor Allen, so just to respond to your question, thank you. Aside from what's being proposed here and what's being considered through this application, through the red line to provide for these widenings, this is what is being proposed. So it's a 3.5 meter widening that would be located towards the developer's side of the road to provide for the necessary widening as per the recommendations from the township's engineer.
Okay, other questions, comments? All right, I read the motion. No further questions. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 10, verbal, information report, sorry. Mover and seconder to get information reports. Councillor Moore, Councillor Chapman. That the report items listed herein be received for information. Number 1 being the fire department report for March 2019. Number 2, the bylaw activity report January 1 to March 31, 2019. Any questions with respect to either of those? All those in favor? Carried. Verbal reports. Director Spagnell, any updates on the official plan or economic development?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. The only update I'd like to provide council with is that staff is actually the presentation is prepared for the educational session. It's just that session has been delayed based on scheduling conflicts, and we'll be looking to have an educational session for council in May.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Okay, county update last time was nothing substantial. We had a waste report, which was a rather interesting waste audit. If you want to read details of it, I wrote about it in this week's Springwater News. Nothing else of significance to report on specifically with the county meeting. Municipal updates. Does anybody have municipal updates? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just for the Aunt Mills Easter extravaganza that happened Easter weekend, they had a new rabbit run this year, and they had 175 kids in that run, so that's awesome. And it was a $2 entry fee, and also they raised over 300 pounds of donation of food that's going to the Elmville Food Bank. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I just want to make a comment with respect to the Maple Syrup Festival. It was, as far as I'm concerned, a very good success given the weather. It wasn't exactly the greatest, but what we lacked in residents and visitors, we certainly, they made up for it in enthusiasm. And it was very interesting at the log sawing competition. We had members of council there vying for a title against other members from other municipalities. And I'd like to send my congratulations to Deputy Mayor Coghlan and Councillor Moore, who took first place in the women's. And certainly a shout out goes to our mayor, Don Allen, and I think it's Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Who was his partner, who it was basically not even a second or two that split them. Half a second, and he would have come in first. I thought they had it, but I think I would have contested it too.
How you measure that on a cell phone is
I don't know.
is beyond me.
You measured our time.
The other thing I'd like to make mention of is, and council's aware of it, but the BIA in Elmvale are looking to do music in the park at the Gateway Park as a bit of an attraction to attract, visitors and residents to the downtown core. And I believe that's going to start up probably mid to late June and run through till August. So there'll be artists there playing their music. Don't know exactly what kind of music they're going to be playing, but I'm sure there'll be enough for everybody to go around. So getting excited about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I would just also like to add thanks on behalf of all of us to the staff who worked tirelessly on the Elmville Maple Syrup Festival. It's a well-oiled machine that works up there, and all of the help that the staff gave for setting up the booths, being there at the booths and answering the questions. The fire department was there involved, and also the maple taffy pole that we put on at the corner. Staff was there to hand that out all day, even though the crowds were down. I'm told we went through 6 gallons of maple syrup donated by Lalonde's, which was much appreciated. And we went through as many sticks as last year, over 1,500 sticks, so a huge event. And one other thing I want to remind, the Springwater Swing, June the 12th. It's coming up, 6 weeks, believe it or not. We will we'll be having the Springwater Swing, and please register online your foursome. We're still looking for sponsorships. It's going to be a great day, so please come out to that. Councillor Hanna.
Thank you. The annual Medhurst Soapbox Derby and Classic Car Show, June the 1st, Saturday. Thank you for all the staff that's already helped get some of the equipment and that they need, and we're always looking for volunteers to make that happen.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I just want to touch back, if I can, on the county updates. Can I do that now, or do you want me to wait?
Go ahead.
I had asked last council meeting that we make the municipal review a standing item, but it was thought that we could talk about that during county updates. I just wanted to get an update, please, on the review and maybe the letter that was sent by the county. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you, that was my hand was up. So the Regional Review Task Force has not met since our last meeting of council. We are meeting on Tuesday of this next week, so at our next meeting, I will have more to report at that time.
As will governance have met. So basically, the letter you're referring to was a letter written by the warden, George Cornell, which was a culmination of the meetings that had happened with County Council, the workshop, plus a meeting with Governance Committee, plus a meeting with the task force. The governance and task force are continuing, as Deputy Mayor Coughlin just said, with further meetings in the next couple of weeks. But it was basically, as you read in the letter, an expression to start to express the strengths that we feel exist in Simcoe County, but to try to narrow down what areas this government review might want to focus on as they pertain to Simcoe County. I have not found out whether that's been responded to yet, but I will be finding that out in the next week. And as Deputy Mayor Coughlin says, we'll be glad to report back next meeting. Follow up?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Allen, just as a follow-up on that 10.3 where it says county updates, if while we're proceeding through the regional review, I believe at our last meeting, it was suggested that it say county updates and regional review updates. So if we can just make sure that that's on the next agenda.
Next, we have notices of motion, and there is a motion from Councillor Cabral. We need a seconder for that motion, please. Get it on the table. Councillor Ritchie. And I'm going to turn it over, because I'm fighting a barky throat, I'm going to turn it over to Clerk Chaperon to read it. It's got a bit longer.
The motion is moved by Councillor Cabral and seconded by Councillor Ritchie. Whereas on October 3rd, 2018, Council was presented with 4 potential scenario options in a report titled Queen Street East Crosswalk Investigation, subsequently referring the report to staff for further information regarding Scenario 1 of the report. And whereas on November 7th, 2018, Council was presented with a subsequent report, again titled Queen Street East Crosswalk Investigation, which provided further information regarding Scenario 1. At this meeting, Council passed Resolution C545-2018, which directed staff to proceed with Scenario 1. And whereas part of the improvements have been completed to date, being the signage components only, and whereas it is deemed prudent to revisit the future scheduled improvements and remove the roadway painting portion, as this is deemed inadequate in winter months and has ongoing maintenance cost implications. Now therefore, Council directs staff to amend the Queen Street East crosswalk improvements as follows: that Public Works be permitted, as deemed appropriate at their discretion, to forego roadway painting in favor of enhanced signage strategically placed alerting drivers to the presence of the crosswalk, and that enhanced speed limit signage also be installed westbound Queen Street East on approach into Elmvale as a traffic calming measure.
So before I turn it over to Councillor Cabral, Director Coleman, do you have any comments with respect to this motion?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I can confirm that the signage portion has been completed, but the road painting has not been completed to date, and we wouldn't be completing any road line painting for another month or so until we get winter sand cleaned up and temperatures reach a point that we can paint.
But in your opinion, there's no problem with making these changes? I'm asking?
I don't think we'd have to investigate the cost of additional signage, but I don't see any negative implications at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. This actually came up as a result of the same group of people continuing with their petition, and I met with them a couple of times, and fortunately enough, I was able to meet with Director Coleman as well, and addressed that particular location a few times on my own and in the company of Director Coleman. And one of the things there was the proposed painting, which in the winter months is not going to be visible, and again incurs ongoing costs for being done on a maybe semi-annual or every 3-year type of period. Thereby, the original amount would just continue to be spent every few years. I was of the opinion, looking at the area, that the concerns from the residents were more focused on drivers not being familiar with the area and not being alerted to the crosswalk. Crosswalk is in perfect compliance with provincial handbook guidelines. However, I guess they wanted to see if there was a little bit more that could be done. Enhanced signage on the way to the crosswalk from both directions, alerting them that in fact there is a crosswalk ahead, would be something that I thought might be beneficial. Another sign maybe at Shaw and Queen Street East, alerting people who are coming down Shaw. A lot of visitors go to the liquor store there and then come out to Shaw and make a right-hand turn. These particular installations do cause some difficulty for people who are approaching a stop sign, and then immediately to the right there's this PXO crossover with a set of lights. So we were thinking maybe another sign opposite that location. There's presently one there alerting them on the way to the stop sign. But some people may look at that intersection and think that that's what that sign is referring to. Another one opposite their location, making a right-hand turn or even a left-hand turn for that matter, they would see another sign on the opposite side of the road. So the idea was to put additional signage there in strategic locations to assist with them, understanding that the crosswalk is in that location. The other one is to try to attempt to mitigate people coming down Queen Street East from the Orr Lake side. It's mostly residential right through there until you pretty well get to the lights at County Road 27. And a lot of people who are coming through there, I guess for whatever reason, they seem to think that they can continue along, and there's been complaints of people speeding into town. So enhanced signage at that particular location, I think, might mitigate that. And I also asked that maybe we could put the radar one up there for a little bit to get some kind of a background on that. I don't know what the stats would be, but that's the gist of this motion, is to take the remaining funds and instead of painting and incurring ongoing costs, to put up the additional signage.
Thank you. Any questions or comments with respect to this? Deputy Mayor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Director Coleman. If memory serves, the painting at the crosswalk was an initiative to prevent cars from parking. So will there be no parking signs then required, or how? I thought that was the delegation. Part of the concern was that when you are on Shaw Street heading south and you go to turn right where that new sign is, there's often cars parked there and typically blocking the crosswalk. So without the painting there, with the no parking area, how are we going to indicate to visitors or members of the public that they're not permitted to park there?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Deputy Mayor Coghlan. The current township bylaw as it exists does state no parking within 9 meters of an intersection. So it is technically a no parking zone. It is, I believe it is not currently signed, and as I recall, the scenario one included painting and no parking signage. I'd have to go back and read it. So if we're eliminating the painting, I guess I'd go on your direction, whether I include the signage or it's removed as well.
Follow up?
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you to Director Coleman. I'm trying to understand it, and thank you, Councillor Cabral, for bringing this forward. My concern is that we do have a municipal-wide traffic calming initiative, and as members of council, we hear on a daily basis or weekly basis from residents throughout their wards of issues that, of speeding and community safety. Rather than making sure that it's not a one-off approach, this is an issue, this has been before this council. Does what we're suggesting here comply with the approved policy that we have? And is it possible to get a report back to council with what the differences are now? Because we did commit to a group of individuals that were here through that delegation that we would be doing something. And I feel if we're going to be changing that, I think we should definitely notify the individuals who requested that. But it's not that I don't support it, it's just I do feel that when Councillor Cabral was speaking about the Shaw Street and the signage, I can picture a sign there. So I just want to know what we have already done and what we're planning to do, or how this plan alters from the one we've already approved.
So, Deputy Mayor, are you proposing an amendment to this motion then, or?
I would like to have it referred so that there's like a map with where the sign's gonna go, and if it's one of the blinking signs and what the cost is, because it doesn't indicate
Okay.
what's actually gonna happen or the cost implications.
Councillor Cabral?
Yeah, if I might provide clarification, Mayor Allen, through you to Deputy Mayor Coghlan. It's the same group of individuals that I've was contacted by that this has been gone through. And I've been keeping them kind of apprised of what's been going on as far as trying to alleviate their concerns. There is one sign there, as I stated, coming up to Queen Street on Shaw before you get to the stop sign to make your right-hand turn. But the point of this is to utilize the potential budget that was going to be utilized for painting to provide for the additional signs. So the idea is that there won't be any additional cost implications for this particular change in the project.
Any further comment or question before we vote on this? Deputy Mayor Coghlan?
I guess, Mayor Allen, I would need to put forward a motion to have this amended to refer it to staff.
Okay, and do you want to be more specific, refer to staff to do what?
So I have heard here this evening that the cost of these, I'm assuming it's 2 signs, are equal to that of the painting. I want to know if it's in compliance with our approved traffic calming initiative. I want to know where these signs are going, if they require the lights, or if it's just a km/h sign, or if it's a crosswalk ahead signs. I'm not following what our plan is here.
Do we have a seconder for this amendment? You're making the motion.
I understand that.
Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Chapman.
I could maybe simplify things.
Deputy Mayor Coghlan?
Or if there's an opportunity from Public Works, if they could simplify for this for me, like what this looks like, and if there are additional cost implications, maybe it doesn't need to happen, but where the signs are gonna go and what they're going to read, that would be great.
Director Coleman? If you don't feel that we have the information now, we can refer it and get the information and bring this back for a vote next meeting. But if you can answer the question, then maybe we won't need the amendment. But go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I think at this point I wouldn't be able to answer the question fairly. I would be able to guess at what this would cost, but without
That's fine.
actually getting costing. And then I would have to also go back and review the report, what the line painting was and what the estimate on that was.
Can we, we'll just let the clerk review the amendment and then read it. Maybe I'll have the clerk read the amendment, please.
The motion would read that the motion now before council be referred for further report by staff outlining conformance with the traffic calming policy, any potential cost implications, as well as outline of what signs would be placed, as well as location.
Thank you. Are we missing one, Councillor? Yes, we are. Discussion, Councillor Cabral.
I just would like to, I don't know about making an amendment to an amendment, but I'd like to have some kind of, something in there to make sure that painting is happening, that obviously that doesn't sound like it's going to happen, but I would like to make sure that when it comes back that it's not too late down the road, I guess is what I'm looking for, because these folks, they would like to see something done there sooner rather than later. Thank you.
I think the presumption is that it would be happening expeditiously. Councillor Hanna?
Thank you. I guess my question is, before we put the staff to all this extra work, the first sentence in the second last paragraph says that public works be permitted as deemed appropriate at their discretion. And I think that I have enough confidence in staff that they would do this without us having to put them to the process of having to generate another report.
But there was also reference to sign locations, right? Was there? All right, that's the discussion. Are there any further comments before we vote on this amendment? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, is that right? Opposed? 1, 2, didn't you vote? Okay. Okay, let's do it again. Those for the amendment? 1, 2, 3, and opposed? That amendment was defeated, and we're back to the original motion. Any further question about that? All those in favor of the original motion? Carried. Thank you. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get the bylaws on the table, please? Councillor Cabral, Deputy Mayor Coghlan. I can't see that. Oh, yes. Any items for future consideration that anybody wants to bring forward? Councillor Coghlan, or Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. It kind of actually goes back to what we've just been discussing. I would like to have an item for future consideration, and the item I'd like to bring forward is with respect to the radar speed signs. Many of the meetings we've been at, some of the town halls, that seems to be an item that comes up all the time. I'm familiar with these signs. There's one at Wasaga Beach on the entrance from 92 down the road into the beach. For those of you who might not be familiar with them, they are speed signs that are illuminated by LEDs, and when the person drives in excess of the marked speed, which is in our case going to be 50 kilometers an hour, it could be whatever you put on there, the light flashes and indicates their speed. These particular signs are heavily used in Toronto, in and around the school zones. They're heavily used in other municipalities where there are issues with speeding. And I would just like to suggest that my understanding is they're about 80% effective in alerting drivers. Now, if you have a driver who just is going to speed, it's not going to make much difference. But any driver who's inadvertently speeding, this catches their eye and does get them to slow down, and they can be fairly effective. They claim to be 80% effective.
So, Councillor Cabral, if you could formulate the motion for the item for future consideration.
Is that all you want to know?
We look forward to your discussion about it at length when it comes forward.
Fair enough. Would you like me to do that right now?
Yes.
Perfect. I just wanted people to know what they were going to be voting on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess my motion would read that item for future consideration be considered with respect to LED radar speed signs in being made available to possibly wards, a certain number of signs, and that staff investigate that and report back to council with their information.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Moore. Any discussion before we vote on that? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Any further Items for future consideration? Okay, bylaws. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get those on the floor? Councillor Moore, Deputy Mayor Coughlin, that the bylaws listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk, 21945, appoint fence viewers, and 5000-287 regarding ZB 21811, 2006-384 Ontario Wink Gallo. All those in favor? Carried. And confirmation bylaw, could I have mover and seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Cabral, that bylaw 21946 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the regular meeting held on May 119, listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? Carried. And a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Coughlin and Councillor Ritchie, that the regular meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 8:25 p.m. to meet again at regular meeting on May 15, 2019, 6:30 in the council chambers at Minsan, Minising. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in.